Click, buy, deliver with the two-time Motorcycle News Dealer of the Year, Colchester Kawasaki. Proud sponsors of Chasing the Racing.
3, 2, 1, and welcome back to Chasing the Racing, episode 80. And we're delighted.
Shut up, man.
What's that?
80 already.
Episode 80.
That's terrible.
Been going for coming up 2 years now, Dom. Nearly 2 years. But delighted to be joined by Mr. Larry Carter, so, aka The Scoop. How are we doing?
Hi, Chrissy. Hi, Dom. Great to see you. And great to be involved to see the inner sanctums of the TARDIS, because this studio, this portable studio that we're in, I have passed it a couple of times on the A1, and I've often thought about running you off the road, but I thought better of it. But I've often wondered if, because I've known about Chasing the Racing podcast for many years. I didn't realise you're up to 80, but congratulations on that. And I've often thought about, the inner sanctum as to how it works, because I know it's massively popular with a lot of race fans, because it's the sort of thing that race fans like. They love seeing motorbike go around a track, but as we've found when we've done the chat shows at the North Yorkshire Road Racing Supporters Club and various other things over the years, they like to see behind the scenes. It's like a little bit of when you go to a theme park and you get the chance to stroke the dolphins or whatever. You pay a little bit extra to do that, and it's great just to see something other than motorbikes going around.
Can we change the bio, please? Can we change the bio to the show? We are the stroking dolphins.
Never mind chasing the races, stroking the dolphins.
It's not like that. It's a euphemism for something there.
It feels a bit odd for me, because it's usually the other way around on BSB weekends. Usually you're in pit lane or on the podium asking me the questions, where it's going to be kind of roles reversed. But I tell you, one thing I just want to quickly mention is me and Dom actually met at the North Yorkshire Road Racing Supporters Club, which we're both sponsored by, and it was actually, I don't know if Dom knows this, but it was actually Larry along with Chris Herron who set the club up in 1985. So
it was, Chrissy. You're quite right. Chris Herron, who is currently Leon Haslam's manager. I know you've had a little bit of an involvement with him and a consultory role. And he used to be an MCN reporter, did Chris. He managed Cal Fogarty for a number of years. And I grew up with Chris, lived in the same town, in a small market town in North Yorkshire called North Allerton. Chris and I went to school together. And we used to get on our push bikes and go to Croft if there wasn't a bus or we couldn't blag a lift with somebody. And we had a mutual love for motorcycle racing. So
it's kind of your legacy that Chasing the Racing is part of. Well,
maybe it's in an indirect sort of a way.
It is, yeah.
But when I started racing myself, Chris was one of my helpers, as it were, and he used to help me with a little bit of promotional stuff. Chris had a knack of getting stuff in the local newspapers, and I realised then that if I was to get sponsors, then publicity was the way forward, and that sort of set the tone for the business that I'm now involved with. Chris and I go back a long way, and we said after we'd been Chris had never raced, but I was racing. There was another guy called Mike Parvin from North Allerton who was racing. And we said there must be a way of, trying to raise some funds, go for a pint and see if we can have a bit of a pub quiz. And of course, in Northern Ireland, everybody had a supporters club. The Joey Dunlop supporters club, the Alan Irwin supporters club, Eugene McManus supporters club. And that was quite simply, they met in a pub on a Friday night or whatever, and they chucked a couple of quid in the bucket to come in the door. They watched a few videos of motorbikes, and at the end of the day, the rider earned a couple of £100, which bought a set of tyres or whatever, and we thought, well, nobody does that in England. Let's see if it works. And a group of us got together and thrashed. It probably would do. We borrowed a venue, a room in a pub, and word got about, and I think it was about 100 people that turned up, and we did exactly that. Just watched a few videos. Chris interviewed one or two people, and I used to absolutely crap myself when it was my turn to get up there. And how did you get on at Carnaby this weekend? Or fell off or won or whatever. And it kind of went from there, and the purpose of the club now is exactly the same as what it was 35 years ago.
Imagine how many people it's helped in 35 years. Obviously I've been a direct beneficiary myself, and when I first started, when I was really, I think I must have been about what was it, 12, 13 when I first started going to the club, and Dan Linfoot was kind of where I am now, if you like. And it's but yeah, in 35 years you must have seen some.
I think we did the calculation a little while ago, a few years ago, saying that the club's probably raised around about £1 million over the years for races, and it's, I don't know what they give out now, 400 quid here, 500 quid there, it's a set of tyres maybe, and that's, back in the day, that's what it was, a set of tyres or an entry fee or something. And it the whole idea is, I still realise that there's grannies being sold on eBay to get kids to go racing, and what we need is to, without the grassroots of the sport, and it's the same in any sport, whether it's soccer, cricket, golf, whatever, without the grassroots of the sport, there is no Jonathan Ray or Carl Crutchlow or Joan Mir or Valentino Rossi or Josh Brooks or Shaky Byrne or whatever. They have to come up, and I kind of failed in my career like 99% of people fail with lack of finance. And you, as I say, you're pawning everything you can get. Me and my girlfriend at the time, now my wife Sue, we're maxing credit cards out. You guys have done exactly the same, but that little bit of help every now and then, it just goes so much more, because it's not only financial help, it's psychological, in as much as people believe in you. The North Yorkshire Road Racing Sports Club, to use them or a sponsor, wouldn't invest in Chrissy Rouse and Tom Herbertson if they didn't believe that you could go out there and do it. You were not going to the pub with £100 cheque that they're giving you on Friday night. You're going out there, and that gives you that little bit of motivation to know. It's like a football team that gets the support. It's nice to know that there's people rooting for you as well.
It's a good community as well, and especially for connect. Like I said, this whole podcast, it was a kind of a sidekick from the club, as in we met there, and it sort of went from there. And the amount of people that I've met, guests that have came in, and you sort of have a bit of a chat, and then a few years later, you're speaking to them about rides and sponsors and all kinds. It's been very beneficial for both of us. But I guess for people that don't know you, we get a wide range of people listening to the show. Some are like real hardcore road racing fans.
Yeah, this will put them off, that is for sure. The audience will diminish considerably after this one, Chris. Do you realise that?
Do you know what, Larry? We'll get some people have came to us and said, like, my wife isn't even into bike racing, but she sits and like learning about it. So we'll get people from all kinds of angles, and I guess BSB fans will be very familiar with you from BSB Radio and all the work that you do with the PR side of things now. But just before we get into that, I know you used to do a bit of a racing yourself, and you've won some cups back in the day. So we'll quickly go through that before we get on to what you do now.
Yeah, I've been in love with motorcycle racing, motorsport for since I could walk. My one of my first memories was being at Croft in the 1960s, watching cars go around a track. I remember watching car Grand Prix on TV, and I was always I had a massive Matchbox toy collection. I used to ask my mum to not give me pocket money, but bring me a little Matchbox car back from the shop or whatever, and I had hundreds of them. And I used to play races on the carpet and everything else, and I just absolutely loved it. And something that stuck with me right to this day is the race programs. And I always used to get a copy of a race program, and I've got them. They would have been worth thousands if I hadn't scribbled all over them and done everything else. But going back into the 1960s and 1970s, I was a massive fan, and the motorsport bug bit deep. My father wasn't. He had a motorcycle, but he wasn't into racing. But my mum's brothers were. She had three brothers who raced, not on the road. One did speedway, and a couple did motocross and trials. And unfortunately, one was killed when he was 21. And I was...
Which discipline was that, if you don't mind asking?
Yeah, he was doing the Scott Trial of all things.
Really?
When the Scott Trial was in a different location to where it is at present. And he'd done a section, come out of the section, and he stopped at the end and had a fag like he normally did back in the 1940s or whenever it was. And as he was there, somebody else came through the section at a fair rate of knots and crashed into him and broke his leg. And he was carried at the time. Remember, this is, I think, 1946. This was pre-NHS. So, he was...
First aid wasn't common knowledge whatsoever. It was just get him up the hill.
He was literally carried by 3 or 4 people to the nearest pub, and he was parked up on, in a bar stool or whatever in there, and they waited for an ambulance to come. The ambulance eventually came and took him off to a local hospital. And because back then on a weekend, the regular surgeons and everybody else, this is just a year after the Second World War ended, the regular surgeons weren't on a weekend, and they, the reserve team was there effectively. And the story goes that he overdosed with anaesthetic, and he never came out of the operation. So
holy crap!
Yeah. So and sadly, he died on the operating table. So you can imagine what my mum's thought when I said, "I'm going to race motorbikes, Mum."
Yeah, that would. Yeah, but, you've gone from trials like one of the.
Yeah. But
wow.
But yeah, so right through my youth, I used to think I was Barry Sheen. I got my mum to make me a set of sort of like patent leathers, so I could race my push bike. I organised races around the local park with all my friends and things like that. And one was Mick Grant, one was Paten, and I was Barry Sheen. And we went through all that. It was right next to an old people's home, and they used to come out and watch us, flying around on these bikes. We had took some skin off, but. And then I wasn't. This sounds bad if any kids are listening, but I'm reasonably. I've got a little bit of nous about me, and I kind of know how things work. And I didn't find school too hard, but I wasn't really interested in school because I was going to be world champion. I was going to be 500cc world champion, and that's all I was interested in. And I used to write in the back of exercise books, and Mr. Rouse here, as a school teacher, will no doubt reprimand me for this, but nothing to do with school. I just doodled number 7s and Donald Ducks. I can still draw you the best Donald Duck ever.
And there's a challenge. That's happening before you leave here, by the way.
Get me a piece of paper and a pen, Don, and I'll do you the best Donald Duck you've ever seen.
There we go.
But Donald Duck being the emblem on Barry Sheen's crash helmet, of course. And
sorry for interrupting you again. Why was that?
Because Donald Duck was a star, and Barry Sheen said that he was going to be bigger than Donald Duck.
Sure, is that actually why?
That's true, yeah. So that's
learning all the time, Larry. Learning all the time.
And he was a showman, and things like that. Sort of like, it's a bit like Superstock 1000 champion wearing pink boots, isn't it? It's something to stand out from the crowd.
Oh, it stood out all right. There we go.
It stood out all right. Yeah. The Pink Panther, I nearly called him this year a couple of times. But let's give it for those people that don't know, Chrissy Rouse, who won the National Superstock Championship this year.
He's never mentioned it.
No, he's never mentioned it. Doesn't like to talk about it.
Very modest, closed book.
Doesn't like to talk about it at all.
Hides behind his pink boots.
But yeah, but then there was little pink flashes appear on the leathers and on the crash helmet and everything else like that. And we used to, because we don't refer to him as Chrissy Rouse, call it Sir or Mr. Rouse.
That's brilliant. I even hear that when I'm there. It's brilliant.
When he, if he makes a mistake in a race, there's 100 lines at the end of this one, or that, he falls off. There's extra detention. And, well, poor Chrissy, he gets absolutely slaughtered by us on the commentary team. But back to my sort of like youth, as it were, and I left school and I got 8 O levels or whatever it was, and I went on to college to study engineering, and all the time, all I wanted to do was race motorbikes. I had a road bike at the time, and I was finding that I was becoming not dangerous, but because I always rode within what I felt were my own limits on the road, but I was becoming a little bit of a liability on the roads, and I ended up having a big road accident where I had a big crash, and I had a pillion passenger who was quite badly injured in it. But more to the point, the bike that I had was a Suzuki JSX 404, which I'd bought new a year before. And to try and get the parts to rebuild it, because it needed headlights and mirrors and indicators and tanks and everything else like that, I thought, there's no way I can put this back to a road bike, so here's your opportunity. Let's put it on the track. The most uncompetitive bike known to mankind, and I tried to race it.
What made you buy it?
It had an 18-inch front wheel and a 16-inch back wheel. It was like, it was a
American chopper.
You remember the Suzuki Katanas? The futuristic sort of like, Star Wars type. Well, it was kind of based on that concept. 400, it must have pumped out about 40 brake horsepower. It weighed about 3 Sherman tanks. And there was a class at the time called Formula 3, which was 252 stroke, 400 4-stroke. it was a 400 four-stroke. But the bikes you're up against were 250 LCs, which had just come out. So
factory jobs.
So here I come along for my first race in a Boris set of leathers, and in my uncle's Vauxhall Viva estate, because we didn't have a trailer or a van or anything, and I had to take the front forks of the front wheel out to get it in the back, and rocked up at Carnaby. And I thought, I'm the kiddie here. I'm going to break eggs with sticks here. I got lapped. I finished last and I got lapped. A guy called Tony Fowler won the race. I can't remember, he could be past me. I thought I braked late into the first right-hander at Carnaby. No, he had another gear to go before he braked. And I got the widest, rudest awakening in my life. And I thought, there's more to this racing crack than I reckoned. And so many people I've talked to since then have said, oh, yeah, I finished last in my first race as well. And you kind of think, oh, well, that's not bad. But so anyway, we got rid of the bike, and I bought a 250 LC, and just before the next season started, a group of friends were out for, we went out for a couple of beers on the Friday night, just before I was racing at Elvington on the Sunday. And coming back from the pub, we were all egging the driver on to go a bit faster. He did go a bit faster, but most of that speed was on his roof, as he got the car wrong in some S's near the S-bends near the
the S's. He's thinking in race mode here. They are.
And I got fired out of the back window of his Mark II Escort, and I broke my collarbone very badly.
You just made that so calm. Fired out a window and my collarbone.
Yeah.
Stop the landing.
And the aforementioned Chris Owen was in the car as well, and Chris got away with it. He didn't get any injuries, and I'm laid there in the hedge back thinking, this shoulder doesn't feel too clever. I'm not sure about Elvington on Sunday. Anyway, went to the hospital, diagnosed with a broken collarbone in 4 places. Did they want to plate it? And at the time, we'll put, because I can't wrap it up, of course, it's a figure of 8 bandage like it still is nowadays. And so, sign you off work for a month, and, I thought, well, that's going to go down like a lead balloon with my boss who hated motorbikes. And
what were you doing at the time, trade-wise?
I was driving a baker's van.
Oh, grand.
Because, when I had left college and I had no real interest in engineering or whatever, all I wanted was to earn money to race motorbikes. So I got 4 jobs. I worked in a bar. One, which started off a couple of nights a week, ended up being 7 nights a week. A friend of mine had a log round where we used to go to the local wood yard, bag loads of logs up, and take them around the streets in his van, flogging them people with wood fires, which was back then.
Sounds like Dom's a bit like what Dom gets up to.
And
not at all, Chrissy. You need to start following what I do for a living here. There we go. Something similar though.
And one of the other jobs I did was I drove a bread van. So I'd heard that there was a job going, and I went to see the boss. He said, "When can you start?" So, when do you want me to start? I said, "This afternoon." And you've got a driving license, haven't you? Yeah, Anyway, so we got the job, and of course it was very early starts, but that was fun, and I worked in the bakery as well. That was the 4th job. So, but all the time I was earning money, and that was good for the racing. And eventually, I'd saved up enough money so that I could buy a 250 LC. And then this road accident happened, of course, and I'm there in the hospital laid with a broken collarbone, saying, it looks like Elvington's off. We'll give it a go. We'll give it a go. And I, of course, the typical racist trick is you don't let anybody know you're injured, because had the medics done what they needed to do, there's no way I would have been fit enough to race. So we parked as far away as we could, out of sight of everybody. I put my leathers on before I left home, because it was excruciatingly painful, as you can imagine, trying to get your arms through the leathers and everything else. And I was sat bolt upright in the front of this car with my leathers on, with the heater on. It was the start of the season, and I was sweating. Better not say what I was sweating like, but. And we got to Elvington. I told the lads to put the bike through scrutineering, and came back. It had passed, and they had to lift me on the bike, and I sort of like gritted my teeth. And I went out in the first race, and I just thought, this is going to hurt if I fall off. It's gone proper hurt.
It hurts now, never mind when you fall off.
And there was one rider who shall remain nameless. I shall spare him his blushes, but he wasn't the best rider out there. And
come on, tell us the name. You can't set it up like that and not say the name. Give us the name.
There's a guy called Mike Moore who he's a great guy, is Mike, and I've got a lot of time for him. But he was one of the guys. He wasn't your average bike racer. He was a saddler, and he was a great lad, but he'd never really had an awful lot of speed. And it came about that he bought himself a racing bike and he was out there racing, and Mike was never the guy that was always going to win a race. He'd usually be towards the back end of the field, and I was dicing with him throughout this race, and I came off and I finished the race and went back and went out in another race, and Mike had beat me in a couple of races. Well, the world knew about it. I'd beaten Carter twice, and right, okay, Mick, well done. Little did he know, or anybody know, that I had a wing down at the time. That's not an excuse, but I thought he was funny. Anyway, we eventually did that. The 250 LC just threw me off at every conceivable opportunity because I didn't know how to set a bike up, and it was jetted all wrong, and it was lean, and it was going into the first corner at Carnaby, and I was 10th or whatever, and I didn't grab the clutch in time, and it fired me over the top, and I went and, had some cheap leathers on. It went through the cheese grater. I was absolutely skinned. Anyway, I bought a 250 LC 250 Gamma, the RGV 250, the Mark II Gamma, because they were the bikes that were coming through. 250 production at the time. There's 100 entries in some of the things. To get to the final, you used to have to go through a heat and a semi-final before you got into the final. And the Gammas were the thing. And I bought, a friend of mine was called Tony Cummins, who's sadly no longer with us. And Tony's friend, Tony had a Gamma, and he was winning everything. And I spoke to him, and he says, "Yeah, my mate's got one for sale." So again, I dipped into the piggy bank, bought this, best bike I've ever raced. And all of a sudden, because I knew I could do it, and I was finishing 10th and 12th and falling off, and then all of a sudden I was there challenging for race wins, and we finished second in the 250 production Auto 66 championship that year. And I thought it's about time that we went on to something a bit different. So I bought a 750 Suzuki JSXR 750, one of the old nails. And
so this has gone from two strokes.
So I've gone from 250 two strokes to a 750 4-stroke, and
Chelsea tractor compared to the 250.
And I had a 400 Yam in between, which we'd done okay. I won my first championship on a 400 Yamaha, ex-Bernie Usher, 400 Yam. I was up again. It was a 750 production championship, and I was in a 400 Yam. There's no way that bike was production. Not because we were cheating, but it had no clocks on it, and the exhaust were hammered in for ground clearance, and it had no indicators, no horn. It wasn't a production bike. But you were up against the 750s, and we won that championship. So anyway, we went on to up the classes, and I bought this nail, and it was okay. Then I had the mother of all crashes at Carnaby when I was lying second in a race, and there's a very fast left-right chicane at Carnaby, and it was straw-baled, and so you went through the left, which was tyres. And
for people that don't know who are listening to the show, straw bale is not soft. Far from it.
Well, and
countryside Argo.
These tyres were chained together on the left-hander, so you couldn't get too close to them. And then there was these straw bales. When you were leant over, you had to give sufficient clearance for the throttle hand on your right to not make contact with them. And this guy was on an RG 500 Suzuki, a guy called Dave O'Leary. And again, he's another guy that I've known for a long time. He used to have one of them smileys, them acid smileys on his back. And he had an RG 500. And it was like a rocket ship in a straight line. You couldn't keep him. My nail was like, I was leathering the nail, and I could catch him on the brakes and keep up with him around the corners, but then he leathered it down the straights. And Carnaby had two fairly long straights, and I followed him for 5 laps in this 6-lap race, and I thought, I'm going to have to make a move on him on the back straight, which meant, because as he was going through the chicane, he was like not out of control, but I didn't want to get too close to him because he was getting very close to them straw bales on the exit. And I thought, so I backed off a little bit, tried to get the run down straight, couldn't get it. So this lap, I thought, I've got to sit right up his chuff. Came around this long right hander, and I was absolutely, my front wheel was nearly touching his. And I thought, I'm not backing off this time, because the only chance I've got of passing him is to stick on his back wheel right the way through the corner, get the drive down the straight, draft him a little bit and outbrake him at the end. And everything was going to plan until he clipped one of these bales this time with his right hand, and that pivoted it straight into my path. And quite simply, I just hit this bale, T-boned it, and it fired me up in the air. And I can remember looking down from about 20 feet in the air and seeing my bike spiral into the wheat field. And I was coming down, and I thought, hang on a second, this is going to hurt. This is definitely going to hurt. And I landed, and I felt this intense pain just go through my bottom of my back, to the point that I thought, broke my pelvis. And I'm laid in the wheat field on my back, and the wheat at this point is about 6 feet high, so the marshals are trying to find you, can't find you. And then I saw another
like
bike.
a murder surge party. Just
anyway,
everyone form a line and just keep walking.
Anyway, they eventually found me, and I was there, and I said, I think I broke my pelvis. Anyway, so, all right, okay, I can't move him, and the next thing, got whisked off to hospital, and it was a Sunday hospital. It wasn't an A&E type place. There was, old people in there. It was like a geriatric hospital, or care room, I think it was. And first person I saw in there was Jim Moody, and he was laid on a stretcher, and he'd broken his leg in an earlier race. And I've been a mate of Jim's for a long, long time. And excuse my Scottish accent, don't let him keep you here, Larry. Don't let him keep you here. I've been here before. Don't let him keep you here. And all this is ringing through, and I'm on the stretcher in the A&E department. And Jim's mates were in the process of strapping him into the back of his 608 Merc in one of the hammocks, complete with broken leg, because he didn't want the experience of this hospital that he'd been to previously. So anyway, I had no choice, and I had doctors pricking my toes. Can you feel that? Yes. And all right, okay, well, that's good. You should be able to lead a normal life again. Why is that? So you've broken a number of vertebrae in your spine, and you've compressed your spinal cord. So I've not broken my pelvis, no, but, don't sneeze, otherwise you might be paralysed. All right, okay.
So delicately put.
Yeah.
So whatever you do, don't sneeze, don't blink, and don't fart, don't do nothing.
So I was in this bed, and it was on a geriatric ward, because I had senile old people coming and offering me sweets during the middle of the night, and one tried to get into bed with me, and there was.
You're a good-looking lad, Larry. You can't knock it back, can you?
You never lose it.
A lot going for me back then, Dom.
I've got a broken back, but I'll give you 20 minutes.
Yeah, can't. These affluent old ladies, you can't say no to them. But anyway, after a couple of days,
and 2 nights of shagging.
Sue, my wife,
your wife? Oh, you're still married at this point.
Yes, she came across.
Does she know about these ladies of the night?
She got told about them, yes. And that might have been the reason when I said to her that you've got to get me out of here.
I'm getting
Can't
raped.
Stay another night. Jim Moody was right. And we came up with this cock and bull story to say to the staff nurse on the ward, right, we've had a word with his doctor back in Northallerton, and the doctor's going to organise transfer to the Friarage Hospital for him, and we don't need an ambulance, because we can transport him out. And we came up with this story. All right, are you sure that's right? Yeah, because there was no checking done. And I had rung my doctor, and I told him what was done. He said, look, he says, I'm quite comfortable. I've seen the x-rays. I'm quite comfortable with you going home, providing you do have bed rest for probably 2 or 3 months. He said, you don't need to be in hospital. So the fracture's stable, and you're okay, but you need to you need to just be sensible about this. So we got home, and I laid on the sofa and did as I was taught for a couple of weeks, but gradually boredom got to you, and I was off work at the time. I was a timber salesman. I had a really good job at the time, and my boss at the time was was really understanding motorsport wise, because he did a little bit of car competition himself. But when one of his key members of staff was off, and it looked like I was going to be off for 6 months maybe, they were okay about it, but as you would be, they weren't over enamoured. So eventually I went back to work just after the Christmas. This happened in the July, and I went back to work just after the Christmas, and I thought the bike was... Somebody, the lads had fixed the bike. It wasn't a lot of damage to it, and it was still in the garage. I'm like, that thing I ate over there nearly killed me. And I tried to sell it, and nobody wanted it. This was the start of 1988, and I thought, well, where's the best place to sell it at a race meeting? Well, we'll take it to Carnaby then, first round. But I'm not going to race it. I'll just take it and park it up and for sale or whatever. The more I thought about it, I thought, well, there's got more chance of selling it if people can see it in action. And
talking yourself
yeah,
into this.
And I thought, it's like when you fall off a horse. I need to get back on it because I'd ridden motorbikes all my life, and I didn't just want to not ride them anymore just because I'd had a bit of an off at Carnaby. So I entered the race, and it was a 750 Suzuki. I entered the 1300 production. There was a class called Super 1, which was for 1300 open, and I foolishly entered the open class Count of Carnaby, which is for Grand Prix bikes effectively. Won all 3 races, and so I thought, and there was some decent lads there as well, and I thought,
Go on, name drop who's...
there was a guy called Mick Searle who went on to great things. There was up against somebody like Tony Cummins, a guy called Stuart Barrow, there was Dave Brown. These are all sort of like top club now. I'm just trying to think who, a guy called Colin Knight. I'm trying to think, did race against Charlie Corner. Charlie's probably one, I don't know if you know Charlie, but he's been around since year dot, and he's one of the leading lights. Gary Thrush. I did race against Jeff Johnson once. I did race against Andy McLaddery once. But anyway, we entered the next race and we won again. And before you know it, I was leading all 3 championships. And as well as that, I was leading the East Yorkshire Centre Championship and the East Yorkshire Airfield Championship, and I raced with the North East Club at Euston. Albemarle Barracks, just up there near Stamfordham.
Is that like a tarmac track?
Yeah, it's 3 runways. Yeah,
my old man raced there. Yeah, he won a few. Oh God, my dad was the old man there. Yeah. Like he was the boy around there. My old man.
A lot of Scottish guys used to come down.
Oh God, my dad's got timesheets racing against Joey Dunlop, Chris Palmer.
Ron Haslam raced up there.
Ron Haslam has got timesheets against him. Yeah, they've all been up there. Son.
They used to call it Euston. Named after a village which isn't far from where we're at, I don't think. But
I do my veg deliveries at Euston.
do you know where the track is?
No.
All right. Do you know where Horsley is on the 69?
It's heading on the wall, is it?
Heading on the wall. So if you go down the 69,
Albemarle Barracks.
Aye. So you head off Horsley, go literally straight across the crop fields that way, and you just get to the brow of the hill, heading on the wall, and then heading on this side. So you get to Horsley, turn right. Anyway, we've totally diverged from your racing side of it. Anyway, for a track that's not there, these are the directions.
Yeah, I will just add, we're putting out a newsletter type of thing for it's Chasing the Race, and a friend of ours called Tom's doing it, and the first edition's going out. I think it's Monday, but by the time this podcast goes out, it'll already be out. But the second edition, I think he's going to be doing on old racetracks that don't longer be used. So I think we'll have to have Euston in that one.
Here's a fact for you. I do a little bit of archive stuff and what have you in my various caps that I wear. Do you know that in the past 60 years, the UK has lost 128 racetracks?
Shut up, man.
Really?
128 racetracks have gone. When the tracks that I'm just mentioning there, where I raced at Carnaby, Elvington, Euston, they're no longer there. Yes, okay, Cadwell Park is, Mallory Park is, but there's around the northeast there used to be a track at Catterick, there used to be a track at Thornaby. There's all these tracks that used to spring up, and bearing in mind back in the 50s and 60s and whatever, there wasn't the health and safety ramifications, the environmental ramifications and what have you.
All the boring crap, you mean?
Yeah, the stuff,
stops fun.
The fun police were
kicking around the scene.
It's so bad. I did feature for a magazine where I think we will reckon that there was 128. There's various books out there, the lost circuits of the UK, and Crystal Palace is a big one in London.
And bear in mind, that's just the tarmac scene. Never mind the rally scene, motocross trials, accessibility, everything. It's the motorsport's kicked right in the teeth in this
there
country.
was tracks at Boltby, at Carlton Bank in our region, which used to host British Championship, televised scrambles, as they called them back in the day, and no longer.
I tell you what is sad. I seen the other day they announced the BSB calendar for next year, and they did a little map of the UK with like little lines going off from each track. And if you look at the whole United Kingdom, and there's a huge gap between there's Oulton, Cadwell, and Donington, all sort of
in
level.
the Midlands,
and there's like a huge gap, and then there's Knockhill, and obviously we're bang in the middle of that gap.
We're in the void, aren't we, Chrissy? And I live 10 miles away from Croft. And the nearest track for me as series presenter in British Superbikes is Donington Park, which is 120 miles away, 2 hours away. You guys from 50 miles north of where I live have got even longer. So they say, oh yeah, it's okay, we go to Knockhill. Well, people don't realise that Knockhill is still 200 miles north of where we live. But it is what it is. I understand I'm very, very close to the MSV organisers. Just digressing into BSB for now, but and I know there is reasons, and nobody would love to see British Superbikes come back to Croft more than me. But currently, at present, it's not commercially viable to do that for two people. One is MSV, who organised the series. Now MSV own Donington Park, Brands Hatch, Cadwell Park, Snetterton and Oulton Park. They own 5. Now it's understandable that they want as many of the rounds of that championship on their own patch. That's why the circuits are there. If you own a garage, why do you get your car serviced from somebody else's? You kind of look after yourself. And also the other factor is that there is an opportunity for Croft to join the BSB calendar. The touring cars are there every year. They've been for 23 years. And Croft operated around the British Superbike Championship from 2004 till 2012, I think. And the reason Croft ended up hosting a round of the BSB in 2004 was the contract had been awarded to Rockingham, if you remember Rockingham, which is now closed. And Rockingham is a big NASCAR type oval for those people that don't know.
That's what it was designed as, wasn't it?
To get the Indy cars there. And they ran a couple of, it's on Old Steelworks it's closed now, in Corby, in Northamptonshire. And they had a round of the IndyCar Championship there, and a racer called Tony Kanaan, American racer called Tony Kanaan, holds the lap record at around about 215 miles an hour around the actual oval circuit. But due to geographic problems, the water permeated up through the track because the topography of where it was laid. It meant that they only came once or twice, and it didn't really prove to be good. So they built a road course on the infield, but of course around the outside was a retaining wall, as you would get if you watched NASCAR or IndyCar or anything like that. And BSB went along there for a couple of years, and Steve Hislop was dicing with John Reynolds for the British Championship in 2001. And Steve had a big accident going into turn 1 where he slid into the wall, but as he went into the wall, which was protected by the recticel barriers, his bike went in first, lifted the barriers up, of course, and he slid underneath and broke his leg pretty badly. So he ended his championship, he lost the championship, and that was it. So the following year that they went, because they're trying to keep the riders away from the wall, they put a demarcation line in, just like a white line effectively, a third of the way into the track, and that was deemed to be out of limits. But the problem was that we've all raced at the time, whereas the white lines now were not the bad news that they used to be. Back then they were like ice. And the problem was it rained, and the next thing is people were touching this white line and crashing out. And so they then, halfway through the meeting, the safety stewards determined that it was just too dangerous to race. So they got a grittering or whatever they call it to exfoliate the surface to try and get rid of the white lines that had been put down to keep the riders away. And there was talk about putting cones there to, and all this sort of thing. Anyway, there was a bit of a standoff there. I think the management at Rockingham weren't very cooperative, and anybody knows who Stu Higgs and his team at MSV. They run a very tight ship, and what they say goes. And having worked with Stuart as long as I have done, we don't always see eye to eye on things, but I totally respect him for the job that he does, because his prime focus is safety, rider safety. He's, and he gets a lot of stick because it looks sometimes as though that's not the case, but rider safety is his paramount importance. And, he was wanting things and they weren't prepared to do it. So they said, right, okay, we're not coming back.
We're not coming back, yeah.
And so that was in 2003. And so they said, well, Rockingham has a contract for BSB. What's going to happen? And so the management did a deal with the Croft management to say, right, okay, let's, we'll host the route for 1 year whilst you sort your crap out, basically.
Yes, aye.
And in 2004, that deal was done, and various monies were exchanged or whatever, and Croft ended up hosting it to the point that Rockingham said, you know what, we just don't want it back now. You have it. And, that went right the way through till 2012, I think it was, 2011, 2012. But the problem that he had was, at the time, Croft had been hit with an injunction through some less than friendly neighbours, of which there's a story which we can't really go into on here. But suffice to say that some people had got involved with the circuit, then they didn't like it, and so they tried to get the place closed down. But then they went through a legal process where there was an injunction served on the circuit on the grounds of it being a noise nuisance. And it went to High Court. And Lord Justice Simon, Leeds Crown Court, decided that, we've had enough of these type of places, and words to that effect. You're only allowed to operate 40 days a year. Prior to that, Croft had 267 days a year where they could operate in varying noise categories, but this judgment was like, well, you can only open your shop 40 days a year, effectively. And that really affected things massively, because most of the income comes from track days, test days. Spectator events don't really make the circuits anything at all. By the time you've insured them, you've stewarded them, you put car parking, public indemnity and professional liability insurance is in place, and all the health and safety stuff and what have you. You know what? There you go, Ferrari Owners Club. Just give us 20 grand for the track for the day, and run it yourself. And so with 40 days, they had to decide what they had to do with it. And bear in mind that the major series, something like Formula 3 GT, touring cars, British Superbikes, they require an allocation of them days to operate. So there has to be a test day before. There has to be at least one test day before. There has to be the Friday free practice, the Saturday qualifying, and the Sunday racing. And the circuits pay a sanction fee to host it, a little bit like when the circus comes to town, they pay to rent the field, sort of thing. And so the circuit not only has to have them days where they're not getting an income from somebody hiring the track, they have to allocate, they invest them days. I think invest probably the best word to use, because their comeback is the crowd. Of course, you're bringing the big show to town, you sell as many tickets as you want and get as many people as you can in and make your money that way, and it works. And that's how other tracks work it. But the only problem was, and that's fine, was that allocation had dwindled. So 4 days for Superbikes, 4 days for touring cars, 4 days for GT, F3, and a couple of days for the Rallycross Grand Prix. And we've only got 10 days left now to rent out to, for testing and what have you. So, and everything was going along fine. But the problem was that the 2 years, 2010, 2011, they had a washout. So it meant that they didn't get the crowd. So
financially knocked them.
So and the infrastructure, they have to bring extra toilets in, they have to bring extra water in, drainage, security. You know what goes on at a BSB meeting. Extra power, and it becomes a logistical challenge. And, when Croft aren't getting or any circuit, ain't getting, the 20, 30,000 people through the gates at, 25, 30 quid a time, then there's not the revenue there to sort of like say, well, that offsets the 4 days hire, and that pays for the generator, that pays for the security guards, that pays for the police, that pays for the, for the insurance and all this sort of thing. When, you've got a washout, and, advanced ticket sales, that's why advanced ticket sales are so important, because, it's money in the bank for them, but sometimes it just doesn't happen, or we'll pay on the day because it's only £1 more, and then you look out it's rain, we won't bother watching on telly today. And as a result, you get 5,000 people there. And, your income goes down. You can manage that once, maybe twice, 3 times. But there comes a point when you look at it and you look at the balance sheet and you say, you know what, as much as we love having the big series here,
not worth it.
If we, continue this, it's costing us X amount of money, but them 4 days, we could hire out to Dom Herbertson track days, we could hire out to Chrissy Rouse testing, we could hire out to No Limits, we could hire out to
Carter Sport Rally Team,
whatever. The Jaguar Owners Club, the Aston Martin Owners Club, all these people who just want a playground for the big fast cars that they can't use on the public roads, and McLarens and things like that. And these guys and ladies are pretty affluent. So 20 grand to hire the track between 20 years is £1,000 each. Well,
it's buttons, dear boy.
It's not even the cost of a tyre sort of thing. So
it's a day for Chrissy Rouse's wages.
It's a year's salary, isn't it?
That's it, young.
So so from Croft's point of view, it's a financial. If we were, we would have to take that. As much as we love superbikes, we can't just do it indefinitely if it's costing us money.
But if we have the Euro Millions winner listening and would like to join in and rent Croft out for the BSB, by all means, please get in touch.
And I've spoken to Tracy Morley, the circuit manager up at Croft.
I thought you were about to say she's a Euro Millions there, and I'm like, fair play, young.
I do quite a lot of work with Croft in one way or another, and we always have done. And I have this conversation with Tracy all the time, and she said we'd love superbikes back here, but it's just not logistically possible. Even if Stuart was to come to us with a date, we're not sure that that it would really fit what we're trying to do, because the place is relatively small, and it just takes, there's
I've always see a lot of things I've heard is about the safety features and stuff like that. Is that a lot of crap? Or
not really. I mean, the place has been resurfaced now. A lot of riders said it was quite bumpy, and
I think that was the charm of it.
I think if BSB went back there would have to be safety precautions taken, which the Croft would have to invest in quite a lot.
Yeah, there is that element.
Are we talking chain link? Are we talking moving? Are we talking
turn one is really the issue, I think. I mean, the
runoff.
Yeah, quite simply that, and I have a very, very simple solution to that. It's easy to say, but move the start 200 yards further down so you've not got that pack into turn one. Yes, okay. When you're coming round on a lap, of course, it's you're carrying fifth gear into there, 120 mile an hour, maybe it's 130 on a superbike, something like that. And there is minimal runoff, but is there minimal runoff at Cadwell as well, Chrissy?
In Blaze,
Alton Park, that's not being detrimental to Cadwell. They have their own unique, but it's not the overriding issue in my opinion.
I totally agree with that. Just move the start line further.
I would say that corner is the only one that stands out to me as being because out at the back, obviously it's all field. So if you do make a mistake,
there is the right really Barcroft, isn't there, where Dennis Hobbs had his big accident when he hit the barriers through. You go through the S's, the left, the right, and then there's another fast right before Sunny corner. That is, and
is that Sunny in and Sunny out?
No, that's before that.
Jim Clark S's. So it's at the exit of Jim.
There's a little right-hand kink. They call it Barcroft.
Corner.
And I've been round. Obviously I drive a rally car around there, but I have raced a car around there before. And you're arriving at that corner very, very quickly, and the barriers, it's a good 30 metres back off the track, but it's there.
Mm-hmm. You've done a lot more Croft than me.
I love Croft, mate.
I've only been there. I did the BSB there in 2011, and I've done a couple of track days.
The oldest young man ever. It's like, I did it in 2011. I was at the BSB there. Jesus, wept Chrissy. But
I think there's they had to move one of the barriers at the chicane because I think it was a tyre on the exit or something, and
Well, you obviously
not
you work for
European,
the
man.
PBM lot, and they hired the track earlier this year for a test.
Yeah.
What did the lads' feedback from that?
Well, not really so much. I mean, the whole idea of PBM hiring the track was to get back to racing, because this was June and there was talk about going racing in July or August, and they'd not done anything since the tests in Spain and Portugal at the start of the year. So,
And next time I have one of them tests on, if you can get me and him in there, we're not riding Paul's bike. No, if you can get Kim on Paul's bike, that'd be awesome. But I've got an old CBR 600 off a mate of mine. I'd love to go around and dish out some.
I know all the backways in Dom as well.
Good lad. Good lad.
But
Is that what that granny taught you?
Everybody has the price, mate. Now you'll find I'm pretty cheap. So, but I didn't really speak to Josh Brooks or Christian, didn't, about the track. The whole purpose there was twofold. One, as you rightly say, I've been involved with PBM now, Paul Bird Motorsport, for longer than.
Since God was alive.
It's a life sentence. I keep saying to Birdie, it's a life sentence. But Paul's a great guy. He gets tired with a crappy brush occasionally, and he's warts and all. He's Paul. He says it as it is, and he comes with a little bit of he has a reputation, but I really get on with him, and he's been very good to me, and we provide him with a service that he requires. We're not sort of like, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, let's do this for the sponsors, let's do that. When Birdie wants something doing, he rings me up and says, what do you think about it? Sometimes he ring me up, I'm thinking, what about this rider? Well, there's this, that and the other, or whatever. And as you can imagine, the most successful team in the history of the British Superbike Championship, everybody wants to be involved with that. And I know names that do get linked with it, because I get involved with certain. I don't get involved with the decision-making process, but sometimes somebody will, in the team, will bounce an idea off me, because I've got, whether I like to admit it or not, I've got a wealth of knowledge and experience in the sport, and I know how it works, and I know.
I was just thinking, if you had to pick somebody to go on like University Challenge or Mastermind or something for a chosen topic of BSB, you'd have to say maybe you and Fred Clark as a team would be a pretty strong duo.
Yeah, I sometimes Fred, Fred's there with all his notes and everything else. He's the first to admit he's an oracle. Is Fred? He's commentated for 53 consecutive years.
It's mad, isn't it?
And it's such a privilege working with a man, because he was my hero. He was commentating when I was at school.
Mm-hmm. Is his voice is so synonymous with British motorbike racing that I can't imagine going to a race meeting.
We can't either, and he said
it's going to get replaced by you one day. Imagine a Burnett Field lad going, that was close, mate.
Well, the Geordie or Tyneside accent is quite, de rigueur in motorsport in circles, because Jack Bernacle, who was from Hartlepool originally, he does the commentary on Eurosport. And there's a guy called John Hindhaug who is from Sunderland. He does a lot of the Le Mans GT stuff and all that sort of stuff. So it is quite. And I'm sort of like conscious that I don't have a broad Yorkshire accent, but I do have a twang to it, and me and Fred also, somebody's from Bath or Mick Grant, and I says no R's in Bath or Grant.
Kawasaki.
Kawasaki.
And we have a bit of crack, but I do have a very good knowledge of the sport, not through anything other than it's been my life for 40 years. Mm-hmm. And I don't sit at home researching encyclopedias or whatever. After every race, I do a spreadsheet of every race.
Chris is a fan of the spreadsheet.
I've got every result he's ever had. Every qualifying position he's ever had.
So in your book, is he any good?
Is that so you can average it out?
Don't you talk? I want to know. Do you think he's any good on the spreadsheet?
He's the crap side of average, to be honest.
The British champ sitting here.
So you take every result, put it on a spreadsheet?
Yeah, I have done since comprehended. They're still on spreadsheets because I haven't found a better way of doing them yet. But
we have a game on Chasing the Racing. So all our listeners, every time we say the word spreadsheet, they've got to take a shot of drink.
Is it?
So the more you say it, the better. That's
we want
it.
2 people enjoying this podcast at the
They'll
end
be
of it.
loving it. They'll be absolutely
Spreadsheet.
lit. That's it.
But and I do that quite simply just to furnish myself with I need to know, because I can't follow everybody in every race and know what they've done and what they haven't done. So quite simply, obviously I'm au fait with the race and the result, because I've got to do the podium presentation and everything. But I quite wonder, well, why did Chrissy Rouse retire from that race? And I'll go on to the TSL Timing website and I'll download all the results and there's a page on there that tells you number 69 faller at turn 3, rider okay, or rider to med centre. Everything you see which is on the bottom of the timing screen, it's actually logged. And so what I do is I just go through that, and in my little spreadsheet column I go through the qualifying sheet 1, and it gets a little pink box because that's pole position, 2 and 3, which is a little green box because that's the front row, and then 4, 5, 6, 7 right down the way to 40th. And then we go into the race column, and 1 is a little gold box because he won the race. 2 is a little silver box. 3 is a little bronze box. 1, 2, 3. And if it's a fastest lap, it gets italicised with a line underneath it. So, and you down to 20th in the race.
Is this also for when you're commentating? You've got all the sort of stats.
I never pen through them in my commentary, but they're there. And you can only carry so much about, as you can imagine. But then it's in this race column, it's got either an R or an F, NS, DQ. R's retired, pull into the pits, bike's blown up. Fell, you've fallen off. NS, you've fallen off in qualifying, you weren't fit enough to start the race, non-starter. DQ, excluded post-race. And I can go down this. These are in columns, and then there's the next qualifying grid, which has muddied the waters a little bit because now it's a different grid for race 2 everywhere, in every class on times. So then you have a supplementary grid there, and is a qualifying pole the same as a race pole? It is to me, it's pole position. And then you go through that and the next thing. And what I do is, for every class that races at BSB, from everything from British Talent Cup right the way through to sidecars, every competitor's results are logged into a spreadsheet. I do that after every round, and
there's no escaping you, Larry.
No,
there you are. Good. No escaping you.
And it's colour coordinated so that you can see, at a glance, if somebody's only won 1 race that year, because they've got this little little gold box with a 1 in it, and and in another column I've got best qualifying, best result, fastest laps or whatever, and it's all just.
And so, during a race, and when you've got the podium presentation coming up, do you have anything on? Like, can you open your phone and check this spreadsheet just to see for a few stats? So
I have all the stuff that I have every race result for every class in BSB from 2004, and I have race results back to 96, but not as comprehensive as 2004 onwards. But to carry that, you'd need a trailer the size of this studio to actually carry that about, and it's impractical when I've got a clipboard in one hand and a radio mic in the other hand to actually flick through all that, and you can't carry a laptop, and we've tried an iPad.
Let's be honest, you've done this because you like calling out bullshitters. I've won 6 races. One moment.
Yeah.
Nope, you're full of it. No, you haven't.
Well, again, we sometimes, Fred, who is the oracle, he's got his notes there, and Fred takes about 4 suitcases with him too. But that's fine, because in a commentary box you can just when I'm in the snow or the rain or the wind or whatever in pit lane, you're limited to what you can have. So I have a very, very small lever arch folder, which has the basic information in it that I need. I'll try and rely on a lot what's upstairs, but Fred will say, I think this is going to be his first pole position scoop. What do you think? And I'll think, well,
go away from the mic going,
and I can,
is that right?
And I can go back because I have everybody's pole positions as well, and what class it was in and which meeting it was, and I can just pen through them, and it's everything's updated. I don't carry records for riders that are no longer competing in a meeting. Say Shaky Byrne, I've got all Shaky's records, but what's the point in having him with me? Because he's not racing anymore.
Yes.
So all I do is go through the entry lists, and it sort of like it weeds out most of the rides. The problem you get is when James Rose rocks up, who hasn't raced for 6 years. He's a late entry, and he gets on the podium at Donington Park. Well, I don't have his records because I didn't know he was riding.
You're ringing the wife. Yeah, get through the folder.
I have them, on my laptop, but my laptop's in the press office, and I can't just nip from the press office to the podium and back again. So, and it's not that important. Well, it doesn't really matter when you last won a race, does it? But it just sort of adds to that. But I do it for quite simply that I will then see, that's the third race in a row that so-and-so's retired or not finished or whatever. And it'll form perhaps, one of the questions. You've had a bit of a bad run lately, Chrissy. Because I'm thinking, well, he hasn't won a race since race 1 of the season or whatever. And I want to know then why that is. And I ask the questions that I want the answers to.
Yes.
And thinking that the audience, whether it's trackside or online or on radio or whatever, they want them. It's not, how was that for you? You get some bland. I get so hacked off with a lot of these TV shows, which sort of like say, how much do you want to win this? Oh, well, not really. It's a dancing competition, or what would it mean to you to win the? How much would it mean to you to win this? And how was that for you? And and if you're not careful, if you don't dance well tonight, who will be sent home? No, you're not sent home. You're eliminated from the flaming competition. You're not sent home. That's what you're doing. You're naughty at school. And I guess,
have you been watching Strictly with a Wife by any chance?
That's why I've travelled all the way up to the studio tonight to try and get away a little bit from that.
This is going on YouTube. Your wife might just watch this and go, is that why you ran off?
That's a condition of no names. What does the boys say? What stays on holiday? What goes on holiday stays on holiday. So, but. No, but that information is important to me. I don't do it because I'm an anorak. Maybe I do.
You do it as a professional.
But it's part of my job, and the longevity of my job is I've done this job for 20 years now. And if I'm not the best at it, I'm the first to say, and I had no ambitions to do it. I kind of stumble into it from one thing and another, and we seem, Fred and I, as the established team. I know we've got Paul Marcel and Kerry Cobb, people like that who do the studio presenting, but Fred and Scoop, as it were. Fred's not even his real name. Like, Scoop's not mine. Again, not many people know that. Fred's a stage name.
Really?
Yeah. His name's Peter Clark. He's not called Fred at all.
Peter Clark?
Yeah. So
has he got like a pornographic past or something like that? What's going on?
Because if I ring him up and his wife San answers the phone, I'll say, is Fred there? She'll say, who?
Really?
And she'll say, you mean Pete? Because he's not Pete, he's Pete. And so when I ring him up, we spend a habit of ringing each other up, but occasionally we do, and his wife answers the phone, I've got to, is Pete there, Sam? And, that's it. So, but there has to be an element of that. This sounds might sound a little bit corny, but you have to be somebody a little bit different who you're not when you're doing that job, because you've got to filter out so much. It's a little bit like being an actor. When you rock up on, and you've got to get into that character that does that job. Now, for me, I'm the same person that see. I don't put a different accent on. I don't have to to do anything different. Neither does Fred. But we have to adopt a slightly different persona, and for doing that is for our personal protection, because when things go wrong, and things do go wrong, and you have to have that barrier for when you see your mate led on the track. Now, I was Ollie Bridewell's manager. I was his best friend. He did a column for my magazine when I had it, and we had to go to Mallory Park that weekend. Fred loved the Bridewells to bits. We had to go that weekend, and it would have been all too easy for me to say I can't do it. This is a son I never had. He was laid dead at the S's. I can't do it. And I thought, I have to do it. And I drove down, and me and Marcus's dad, we broke our hearts in the hotel that night, and it was a horrible experience, and it was a time when there was a lot of flooding in the country, and I remember the day like it was yesterday, Friday, July the 20th, 2007, and we'd planned on going to Mallory that night, like we did, me and Sue, and we, before we loaded the car up, I said I was going to take the dog for a walk up the field, and it was a horrible day. It was raining in the middle of summer. It was when there was all the floods, and Rihanna was number one with Umbrella because that was the song of the summer, and Ollie and I were, real good mates. He was started doing a column in Motorcycle Racer, which I was editing later on. And every time you spoke to him, he was just had, the stories he came out with. He had me in hysterics, and I thought there's mileage in this, so we turned it into a column. And I started doing one or two deals for Ollie, and helping him out with one or two things, and we became really, really close over the year or two before his accident. And we travelled. I came back with the dog, and Sue met me at the gate. She said, "I've just had Fred on the phone." I said, "He wants you to ring him urgently." This was like lunchtime on the Friday. "Oh, that's strange. Was he at Mallory?" Yeah. She said he sounded quite upset. All right. So I rang Fred back. I said, "Hi, Fred, it's Scoop here." Scoop, it's Ollie. He's not made it. He's not made it, Scoop. He's not made it. I said, "Fred, what are you talking about? He's not made it. He's not made it, Scoop. He's not made it." And that's all he could say. And this was kind of like, when social media was kind of in its infancy, this 13 years ago now, so you kind of think what, you pick bits upon. I think it used to be, started off with friends, you reunited, and then there used to be MySpace. And, the social media wasn't the medium that it is now with Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, or 1,000 others that I don't know about. And so it rapidly became apparent that there'd been a very serious accident there. And news filtered through that it was a fatal accident. And so I think I'd spoke to Marcus, Ollie's dad, and I think he I can't remember whether he texted me or something, but anyway, it became apparent, and I said to Sue, "Come on, we've got to go." So we jumped in the car and drove to Mallory, and we stayed at a brand new hotel, the Marriott at Leicester. It was a brand new hotel, never stayed there since. And I met Mark, and he told me that that what had happened, but Liz, his wife, Holly's mum, had left home, and she'd forgotten a mobile phone. So she was driving from Wiltshire, where they lived, to Mallory, oblivious that there was anything wrong. And because of the flood, the roads were closed and everything else, and there was no way of letting her know. And she rocked up at the gates at Mallory to be met by one of the race stewards to say, that there's some bad news. So we went. I didn't go to the hospital to see him. He was dead. So, and I thought, what do I do here? Do I just turn around? We were in the hotel, and I thought, I just don't want to be here. I'd lost my best mate. And I spoke to Fred, and he felt the same about it. And we kind of said, well, what do we do in this situation? And we said between us the show's got to go on, really. It's got to, whether we're there or not, it's it'll go on. And at times like that, the paddock community looks to Fred as the sort of patriarch figure, because when we've had fatalities, he's the guy that is able to say a few words, and do when everybody gathers on the grid and all that sort of thing, and he's the man that can do that. So
he's perfect in those situations.
Yeah, we all look up to him like that. He's the the guy. He's the glue that binds the paddock together in that time. Anyway, I remember turning up at Mallory, and I've never not wanted to go to a race meeting as much as I didn't then. I just didn't want to go because people knew that I knew Ollie so well, and I didn't want the sympathy. Oh, I'm so terribly. I didn't want that, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And I remember, the one thing I do remember about it was eerily quiet when I went back to the other side of the bridge, went over the bridge, and it was so quiet. And we went, through the back of the trucks and back of the garages and up the stairs into the press office, and saw a couple of people, and they don't know whether to speak or not, and and I just wanted to be on my own. So I went up to the commentary tower, the new commentary tower that had been built a year or two before that. I just sat and waited for Fred, and and I think he was feeling the same. And we, he came up to the commentary box, and there was only me and him there, and we sort of like had a little bit of a chat about things. And it was about 8:55, and the qualifying was due to start at 9:00 or whatever. And we both agreed. It said, like, right, Pete and Larry have to go away from this now. It has to be Fred and Scoop. And that's when I learned that lesson, that I had to be somebody different at a racetrack. Not Larry Carter. Yes, I am Larry Carter, but I'm Scoop. Mm-hmm. And he's Peter Fred Clark, but he's Fred. Mm-hmm. And whereas we're no different, if we were to go for a drink with you, when we were allowed, you would find that him and I are the same sort of person. But just from a psychological point of view, I had to distance myself from that. And whereas, it doesn't make any difference, because, you do build up friendships with people. I was Steve Hislop's manager for the last year of his career. Not many people know that. I did all his deals, and I had to deal with the aftermath of a helicopter crash. And Birdie and I had flown across to the Isle of Man to do a rally. We were in the air in a Robinson 44 exactly at the same time as he crashed, 100 miles further south than him. And we learnt about the crash and everything else, and we had all that to deal with. So tragedy and racing goes hand in hand. I witnessed the Chris Jones crash on the start line at Mallory, which was horrible. 14-year-old kid. I knew Ashley Martin quite well, his brother Chris Martin, who went on to race for many years. Greg Jones, we were there at Brands when that accident happened, and many more before and after. And you have to sort of like you have to become a very different person to deal with that, because you're there, and the public, the paddock, the community can see that there's been a serious accident, and we've got to still keep talking. And the natural reaction is that you're worried because whoever it is, whether your mate or not, whether a rider that you know really well or somebody who's you don't, there is that element of shit, this could be sort of like it looks quite serious, that. But again, you have to go into the professional mode, and this is why it sometimes frustrates me, because people say, I can do your job. Yeah, well, what happens when there's a rider on the floor there with a leg hanging off? How do you do that? How do you portray that? My go-to method is, obviously, ladies and gents, there has been a serious incident at turn 1. Marshals and medics are in attendance. The situation is under control. We have the best marshals and the best medics in the world. They are getting the best treatment there. As soon as we get some further information, we'll bring it to you. And what you find is that the hardened race fans have seen it all before, and a lot of them go for that. No, that's unfair to say that. Some people go for that. But you've got people there with wives and girlfriends, sons and daughters, kids, grannies and granddads who've never been to a motorbike race before. And there's this guy laid upside down in a gravel trap with medics surrounding him. And to all intents and purposes, they think, it makes them, they get very worried about it. So if it's a little bit like you're in a plane, all of a sudden there was a bang and a clatter in the pilot, and bing bong, just a bit of turbulence there, nothing to worry about, and thank God for that. There is that reassuring calmness, as it were, and I see that as part of the deal. And then subsequently, if there is any announcements from race control, we're asked to relay that information from the race organiser's perspective. Sometimes, not always. And sometimes Stuart Higgs will tell us the injuries, somebody was airlifted out, it was just a precaution. You see that at Cadwell sometimes, because getting a rider to Lincoln County Hospital from Cadwell is an hour in a bumpy road ambulance. It's 10 minutes in the helicopter.
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, but people see the helicopter leaving and
think worst case scenario, don't they?
And and so again, you have to continually reassure people that but then you can't make light of it. Oh, I'll be all right in 10 minutes, and he's not.
Yeah. And you've got to be so careful in your job, so careful.
And that's it. And you have to be careful that you don't misidentify a rider. Chrissy Rouse has gone down there, and he's stayed down, and he's been attended to. Oh, sorry, it's not Chrissy Rouse, it's Joe Bloggs. But by which time all Chrissy Rouse's friends and family have all missed a heartbeat. Because they've both got the similar leathers on. And so you hear Fred sometimes say, I'm not just going to identify who that rider, we know who it is. Well, we think we know who it is.
You need to confirm, but you need the facts first.
And then it flashes up on screen, rider number 1001, faller at turn 1, rider being assessed, or whatever.
It's an extremely tricky job, and obviously you've touched upon quite a few different things you do in terms of, like, you talked about your magazines in the past. You talked about the commentary at BSB Radio during the weekends, working PR for, doing all PR for PBM.
But yeah, PBM is one customer. We do it for quite a few others.
I was just going to say, do you want to just elaborate on exactly what? Yeah,
well, when I bump into somebody at a wedding, a funeral, a christening, or whatever it is, so what do you do for a living then? I'm a builder.
I drive a bread van.
Yeah, what do I do for a living? I'm a broadcaster and journalist. I run a communications and publicity company. I do 1,000 jobs in motorsport, so I just usually say I work in professional motorsport, and if they want me to elaborate on that, then I'll sort of like say I do a little bit of radio work for in British Super, you can, because I'm very, very proud of what I do, but I'm also quite precious of my privacy. People who are listening to this podcast will recognise the voice, but they might not recognise me if they were stood next to me in a park or a supermarket or something. And sometimes you're in a hotel and you're conscious of the fact that Shaky or Brooksy or whoever might be in that same hotel, and he's over breakfast, he's asking for autographs, which is fine, I don't have a problem with that, but they don't ask me for them. And a lot of people would get quite upset at that. It suits me fine, because I do this as a job. I don't do it for celebrity status or because I want to be famous or whatever. That comes. I went to Chester Zoo over winter. Of all places, Sue and I and my wife, we'd had a weekend away, and this was January time, and we thought, let's go, we love animals, let's go to the zoo. We haven't been there before. I was in a queue for a cafe, and somebody says, "It's you, isn't it?" I said, "You're Scoop, aren't you?" And I hadn't spoken a word to him, and this guy, he was like,
"You owe me a tenner."
He was like, we love your commentary, and oh, thanks very much, yeah, and you kind of think, that, you do get recognised, but it's, from my perspective, in a normal year, this 2020 has been totally abnormal in as much as it's been so everything's been affected by COVID and one thing and another. But normally we do 11 out of the 12 British Superbike Championship programmes. We produce them. I edit them. My company publishes them, and we do all of them under the jurisdiction of MSV or the other circuit owners. They sort of like give us the brief what they want in them, and we put it together like a magazine. We do a few touring car programmes. A good friend of yours, Zoe Byrne, who helps me with them. Zoe's got a lot of experience in the car racing world, and she sometimes helps me with that stuff. The commentary on weekends, which is BSB Radio, but then I do other commentary. I do work for the BBC at the Northwest 200, at the Ulster Grand Prix prior to its sabbatical, and most recently at Macau Grand Prix as the lead commentator. I've also done a number of years as the lead commentator in British Rallycross Championship, the British Rallycross Grand Prix. I've worked on Wales Rally GB as a interviewing people like Kimi Räikkönen and Colin McRae and Carlos Sainz and Sebastian Loeb and things like that. Worked at Castle Combe and a number of other places. And as well as that, I write various newspaper columns and magazine columns and things like that. I used to own a magazine. So yeah, lots. And the PR business is just basic communications, and we have a portfolio of customers which we've reduced down, to be honest, over the years for a number of reasons. That that kind of type of business is with the onset of social media. By the time Valentino Rossi announces that he's going to the toilet on Twitter, it would take you 2 hours to write a press release and get it out for that. So nowadays it's, the social media element has kind of taken a lot over of traditional PR, but there still is a place for it. And all them sort of things we do. A lot of liaison with circuits, with Croft, for instance, keeping the local papers informed when there's stuff on, and helping set up photo shoots like we did for Paul Bird when the BBC came down, took the bike up to the studios. That little bit of coverage that you got, Chrissy. Whilst Zoe sorted most of that out, it's just them liaisons. And one part of the company which nobody really knows about is the management side of it, where, as I said, we managed Steve Hislop in his very early, in the end of his career. I have done work for John McGuinness, Michael Rutter, Shane Byrne, Stuart Easton, and latterly for Ollie Bridewell, and I set up the Milwaukee deal for Tommy Bridewell. And Tom, whereas we don't have a formal relationship, with manager or whatever, and the legacy to Ollie, I said I'd help Tom as best we could, and I spent a lot of time trying to help Tom with various deals, and he does all the deals himself. But I've helped him with one or two bits and pieces, and that's something that we kind of get involved in a little bit of a in a consultory role more than anything else. So yeah, there's lots of
strings to your bow.
Yeah, there's lots of hours to a working week, that is for sure.
I tell you what, one thing that I need to mention, I was speaking to Zoe earlier today, and I told her you were coming on, and she said you must ask Larry about the time that Sue sent him to hospital because he got his meat and two veg stuck in a zip.
Oh God.
I'm not sure if I want to know about this. It's a bit late in the day. Go for it.
Burns, if you're listening to this, you're dead. I thought it was the time I got around. I thought my star moment was when James Ellison run me over in pit lane and nearly killed me, broke me nose and hand and everything else, but I was only out of action for about an hour. I was back there.
Good man.
Jack Valentine picked me up and wiped me down, and I was in a proper state then. If you've ever seen it on, I do sometimes put it on my social media profiles. Taddy Okada, who's the manager of Honda, was there with me, bandaged up to the nines with black eyes and everything else. James was coming down pit lane, and he looked behind him, and I didn't get out of the way in time, and the next thing is he runs me over at 40 miles an hour. And I was pretty battered. But yeah, just especially for you, Zoe, seeing as though this was never. It's Carly Rathmell that's to blame for this. It was another one of the girls who does PR, and I started trials riding. I decided that I was going to be the next Dougie Lampkin, so I took up trials riding, and Carly's dad is Malcolm Rathmell, who is was one of the leading trials riders, along with his cousin Martin Lampkin, who's Dougie Lampkin's son. So it's all rather incestuous.
Dougie Lampkin had a son?
No, Martin Lampkin.
Sorry, I was wrong way around. I think. Bennett. All right, yeah.
Martin's son is. I think Dougie's got a daughter actually. But
there we go.
But anyway, and so with Malcolm having a Sherco dealership, and I was going to be the next big thing, I rang Carly up and I said, I'll need a crash helmet. I'll need some a riding top. I'll need some riding breeches. I'll need some boots. I'll need some gloves and all this. So next thing is this big box of stuff arrived, and yes, Malcolm, there was an invoice in it which has been paid as well, and there I was, and the next Dougie Lampkin, as it were, and I couldn't ride a trials bike to save my life. So eventually I thought I'll probably pack it in, but anyway I kept going. Anyway, I rang Calip and I got her to send me some new pants, the lycra pants that you reinforce that you've got. It got to the point that they were a little bit worn out, so I rang her up and sent me some more. And just as I was trying them on in the bedroom, because you can't wear anything underneath them. That's the thing. The skin tight and.
Now hold on, were they winding you up when you told you this, or did you just make this up yourself?
What was that done?
Not wearing anything underneath.
No. Well, you can't, because the whole idea is that they're not majorly waterproof, and you can imagine wearing some boxer shorts underneath it, and you're going through streams and everything else. They just get it's just like having sandpaper in your pants, isn't it? So it's the best way. You don't wear anything underneath them, So
Kilt.
I really hope there's loads of trials riders going, who told them this?
Yeah, well, and sometimes without putting too fine a point on it, sometimes trials riders, when they do something like the Scott trial, they can't stop for a call of nature, so the pants get thrown away at the end of it, sort of thing. The trials bottoms. Anyway, long story short was, I was trying these lycra short trials pants on, and the zip, it's an agricultural zip which is about 3 foot wide, and as I zipped them up, there was an element of my anatomy which got snagged in.
His eyes are watering up already, man.
Tom Herbert's and his eyes are watering, and yes, they did water. And so as I zipped them up, it got halfway up, and then the pain hit. It's a little bit like when you stub your toe and it takes 2 seconds for the pain to hit, and the pain hit. And
are we talking full shaft or just hood?
It was a good probably inch.
The full length.
Do you want me to give you a demonstration?
No, it's good. No, we're in Burnetfield. You get shot for doing things like that around here.
Sue, my wife's downstairs. So we got a minute. She said, yeah, what is it?
You got an inch.
And she looked and said, oh my God, because the skin was actually through the other side of the zip. So I said, just pull it down, just yank it down. It'll be all right. I'll grit my teeth. Yank it down.
Not the first time you'd said that to Sue.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. This conversation deteriorated all because of Zoe Byrne. Anyway, she said, you're going to have to go to the hospital. That is stuck.
A&E, what are you in for? The wife yanked too hard.
So I had to put my jeans on over my semi-zipped up lycra shorts.
I bet you were dead careful with that zip next time over. Imagine two of them.
Went down to, and the pain by now was starting to become fairly excruciating. It was
what was worse, the collarbone out the back of the car, or the shaft of the zip?
The shaft of the zip was pretty painful. So I went to A&E, and as usual, it was a 4-hour wait. I went in, and the funniest thing in A&E is nothing funny about going to an A&E, but you get asked why you're there through the little serving hatch. And the nurse was there. Can I help you? Yes, I've had a little bit of an accident. What sort of accident? The waiting room's
on the tannoy, bing bong.
Sir, can you please speak into the mic louder?
I said, I've had a little accident downstairs. Whereabouts have you injured yourself, sir?
And your wife's absolutely crying behind your back.
I'm there thinking, I said, my nether region. Which part have you actually injured? So we need to ascertain the level of triage as to, are you losing blood? And I said, well, it's bleeding, but it's not, eventually I said, look, I got me cock stuck in me zip. Might have to edit that bit out. But
no, not on this show. You've clearly not listened to this show.
But and then you felt everybody in the waiting room wince.
Laughing.
So anyway,
there's a guy with a broken neck on a 90-degree gun. He can take my spot. The guy The
guy was sat next to was handcuffed to a policeman. So God knows what had gone on there. But anyway,
he probably did something similar to you, but in a different scenario.
Another question I had, which just sprung to mind when you were talking about the commentary thing. What's the most embarrassing thing that's ever come out of your mouth commentating, and then you've just instantly regretted it?
I was talking about his knob on Chasing the Racing's probably up there.
Probably. I never thought when I woke up this morning that we'd be talking about this in a studio in the outskirts of Tyneside.
In a trailer in the side of Burnetfield.
I'm trying to build it up here. We're in the studio. It's actually a box trail, but it's a good studio. Sort of just round off that story. So I went in, and the doctor, he winced as well, and he had to have a local anaesthetic in said organ, and the next thing
said organ.
is it went black and blue, and
did it get bigger?
And I told a friend of mine, the guy who used to go trials riding with, the only man that knew for years was Sue, my wife, and this guy Nick, who I used to go trials riding with. And one time he'd had a drink and he was on, and he mentioned it to Carly, who then mentioned it to Zoe, and the next thing the whole press office and Brands actually knew about it. So
that's brilliant.
But anyway, yeah, everything's fine now, Dom. Just in case.
Did you say to the doctor, would you mind taking away the pain, but keep the swelling, please?
Well,
that's what I mean.
He said you may feel a small prick, and so it depends which way.
You're like that Tomcat.
It's not that small.
But the doctor's reaction was oh hell when he saw it as well. And I said, don't want a doctor to say that to me. But,
not confidence inspiring, is it?
So you think the zip's bad? This chlamydia on the other.
There's a couple of times when people have taken issue with me for something what I've said. Just answer that question, Chrissy. One time was this year when Christian Eden had finished on the podium at Donington, the GP round, I think it was, and I just happened to say to him, well, who would have thought it? You were actually leading the British Championship. And he took, well, what you're saying, you said I'm not very good or something, and it was just one of them things. It sounded so derogatory, and I thought, it came out all wrong, that, Christian. My point was that you, when you were 20th in testing at the start of the season, who would have thought that you would have been with 6 races to go, whatever, you would have been leading the British Championship. But anyway, we laughed about it since. But probably one of the
I've had something similar like that before.
Scarred
me.
I remember that. Yeah.
There's two that spring to mind. One that Fred reminds me about incessantly, but the one before that was Yukio Kageyama. I saw he'd had a problem on the grid for the Crescent Suzuki squad back whenever he was riding for Paul Denning, and I was monitoring the situation, and I thought that there was an issue with the bike, and I thought that, I would just keep my eye on it. I thought, Yukio's not very happy with that, and, don't be at all surprised if he comes down pit lane at the end of the warm-up lap, Fred. Lo and behold, down he came to the pit lane. They changed something, might put a new front wheel in or whatever, and off he went again, at the back of the field. And I called up Paul Denning, and I said to him, Paul, was that stop by Yukio planned then to come into the pits? And Paul, and the way it came out just sounded like, so you had no plans for Yukio to actually start the race from the grid. You wanted him to come down pit lane at the end of the warm-up lap and start from pit lane. And he said, Larry, that's the most stupidest question I've ever been asked in my life. Of course he wasn't supposed to start from pit lane. And again, I didn't have time to respond, because sometimes if you do get misquoted or whatever, and you can't sort of like, oh no, that's right, I didn't.
You've got to keep the ball rolling.
Awful radio. Fred and I sometimes have not crosswords, but differences of opinion, and I just let it go. Whereas Fred will dig his heels in a little bit. No, screw. We had a set to about Harvey Claridge with his long lap penalty this time. It wasn't his fault the red flag came out in pit lane. No, he was in pit lane. And it sounds off, so I just kind of let it go. But my claim to fame, if you like, was, I'm a well-known linguist, as you know. I speak lots of languages, as Morecambe and Wise say, not necessarily in the right order, but I do try. When you're doing World Championship events, I like to be able to greet somebody in the native tongue. You go up to an Italian, buenos dias, or Spanish, buenos dias, señor, ¿cómo está usted, or ciao tutti, and you do try and sort of like just get a, bonjour, comment ça va aujourd'hui, you sort of like just try and do that. And I went up to Marquez when he was just starting his career, and just name dropping, isn't it? And I goes, buenos dias, excuse señor, buenos dias, hablo español, mi amigo. And the Marquez, he just looked at me and burst out laughing. And I could hear Fred creasing himself in his can, and Chrissy knows what I've just asked him. And what that translated, I meant to say hablo inglesi. Do you speak English? Whereas I asked the Spaniard if he spoke Spanish.
He just laughed. He didn't give me an answer.
I think he did give me an answer, actually. But
speak Spanish, mate.
and Kyo, Yuchiki and Ari, me and him became quite good buddies, and I wanted to learn. I wanted to teach me some Japanese words, Kyo. And because all his team, when he'd been working for Honda, because they do the usual schoolboy humour, don't they? What is English? How order a pint? This is how you order a pint in England, Kyo. Barman, give me a bloody pint. And Kyo was going up to the bar in his local bar, and barman, give me a bloody pint. And everybody's like, so he got a little bit reticent with learning English. And I got to know Kyo, which is why whenever I tried to interview him on the grid, he would never, are you okay, Kyo? Hi. And that was it. That's all I used to get. Yeah, happy with race, push. That's a post-race interview. That's it, because he'd had an experience of being embarrassed, if you like, by people telling him that words meant something different. And I got to know Kyo quite well. And I said, Kyo, when I do World Superbikes, lots of Haga-san, Nagai-san, Kageyama-san, and Fujiwara-san. They no speak. I no speak Japanese. How do I say words in Japanese? Mata atade. So what's that mean? That is not formal goodbye. English. See you later. All right. Okay. Yeah. What is sayonara? That is. Goodbye, and I was teaching. I said, "What is hello?" Konnichiwa. And I said, "But is it not konnichiwa?" Oh no, sound French. Konnichiwa. And he was teaching me all these words and everything, and I was building up a little bit of a Japanese vocabulary. Anyway, I said to Kyo, teach me how you say, congratulations, you have qualified well. And then I can say this to one of your Japanese riders in World Championship. And so he said, yosen wa dodeshi taka. And he said, oh, he's good, you are good. I said, yosen wa dodeshi taka. And so I said, what does that mean? He says, well done.
Get me a bloody pint.
Barman, get me a bloody pint. He said, that is, well done, you have qualified well. And he was genuine. That's what it was. So I went up to Katsuaki Fujiwara, he's a proper character, he's the cat. And I said, konnichiwa, yose wada deshi taka. And I stuck the microphone in front of him for a response, and he wet himself laughing. And I thought, Kia was stitch me up here, proper big time. Anyway, I said, because if I get blanked on the grid, I said, unfortunately, his mechanics just wants a word, we'll come back to him because Hage used to be the world's worst. He used to just look the other way. So, rather than embarrass him, I should have embarrassed him because he just wouldn't speak to me. But, I just didn't want that bad feeling, as it were. So, it's okay. Or he's just having a quick chat with TV, because they can't see, it's radio, of course. Or his mechanics or his team manager saying, we'll come back to him later. So I don't make him look like a pillock, effectively. But so anyway, I didn't sort of labour this with Katsuaki Fujiwara. But afterwards, I called him. I said, he speaks pluperfect English. Does Fujiwara? He said, your question. He asked me how I qualified. I said, congratulations, you have qualified well. I said, well, why did you not answer me? And he said, I could not. I find it so funny. He said, I watch a programme when I in UK called Allo Allo. There is policemen. They're policemen who you sound like. Good morning. And he says, also, I watch Clouseau films, and you sound like Mad Frenchman.
Where is the pink path there?
Yeah, is it Aram? Is Minky? Is this Minky? So, and apparently that's what I sounded like to him. So the poor guy just about to start a World Championship race, and Inspector Clouseau rocks up on the grid. So, but that was one of the many times that So I try and tell a little bit. I learn like Fred will say, "Oh, there he is. There's Imre Tot, the well-known Hungarian at the back of the grid. Go and have a chat with him, Scoob. Usually Hungarian on him." And we sort of wind each other up. And another time was I used to say to riders, again, you sometimes have to sort of like think, don't be so frivolous about this. This is a very important race that these guys are going into. And sometimes I make a little bit light of it, but we kind of we don't take ourselves too seriously. I think if you do, in a very serious situation. But I got to like somebody like Mick Wilcox, who I've known for years, just raced 125s. And I say, well, Mick, congratulations on pole position. I rate you as a rider, but Fred Clark doesn't have a very good opinion of you at all. And Mick, he knew I was sort of like, just spinning him a yarn, but Fred took it quite personally to the point that, he come down on the grid and apologised to Mick there and then and give me a proper telling off. And you mustn't say that, Scoop. I do not, I respect these riders. And, so I learnt my lesson there with that one. But we try and have a little bit of fun. We always say we're not very good, but we are cheap and available. And I think I think that we do
so modest.
we often say we are available for weddings, christenings, and we've livened up the odd funeral in our time as well, especially if we get a free sausage roll at the end of it. And I think if you do that we're not a comedy act, but I think if you have that level of just sort of
a bit of entertainment,
the public can relate to it. When we're racing, we're deadly serious. Occasionally, Chrissy Rouse has stepped off. That's he'll be before the headmaster then, he's ignored the black flag.
It's called having the crack, young. You've got to have a bit of crack, haven't you?
But when we're deadly serious, and we know we know our pigeons when it all comes to it, and maybe that's why we've survived the test of time. I've worked with Fred for 20 years now. Really enjoy it. I didn't a couple of years ago. I thought maybe we needed to look for something else. It was starting to become a job to me, and there was one or two health issues going on, and I stopped enjoying it. And for the first time in as long as I can remember, it stopped being. You can't say it's your hobby because it's your profession, but it was never the money that motivated me. Not that it's fantastic money there. I make a reasonable living at the sport, and it's mainly through hard work. Anybody else wants to work 100 hours a week. Somebody once said, the harder you work, the luckier you get, and there's an element to that. You're a teacher, Chrissy. You didn't get to your position through playing PlayStation games. You stuck your head in books, and you went through the process, and you got the rewards for that, and likewise. But it was never meant to be a career for me. But we've found that what we do, and I've started enjoying it again now, which I didn't. I don't mind admitting. A couple of years ago, I was all for walking away from it. I just, I'd kind of done my bit. I'd worked in there for 18 years, and running up and down pit lane is, you have to be fit, to do that. And I do carry a few excess pounds. I don't, but there was a reason for that, and we addressed that, and lost a little bit of weight, and and then the COVID situation came along, and when you kind of nearly lose something. You're appreciative, because I think we'd seen it racing this year. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden, we're back racing, and you don't realise how much you miss it. And and I thought a couple of years ago that when Fred retires, that'll be it, because I'm not sure I want to continue on, and that might still be the case. I think that there was no Morecambe without Wise, or Wise without Morecambe. There's no Cannon without Ball. I'm not sure that I would really want to work with somebody else. Fred retired. People have said, "Will you do the job?" Well, I can commentate. I've done Northwest, I've done Ulster Grand Prix, I've done British Rallycross Grand Prix. I've had Macau's. I can do a commentary. But would I want to do it? I don't know. At present, that's his job. and I've got no desire to fill his boots. There's a mutual respect there, and I think that's why maybe me and Fred have got on so well over the years, because he respects the job I do, and he's done that job. He knows how difficult it is. I see and know how difficult Fred's job is, and admire his delivering his knowledge. But some people have often come into that commentary box as guests with the sole intention of taking over, right? Competing. I'll show you how good I am, and one or two people, make careers of it, but they've hacked Fred off in the meantime. One or two people have taken cameras up there to use as their CVs to try and get jobs, and but there's that respect between, and we're good mates as well, and that's important. We're a generation apart, but we respect what we do. We don't blow smoke up each other's backsides. That's not what we're there for. We're there to do a job. And what we must do is it must satiate the general public's appetite, because we've only ever been hauled over the coals once or twice for maybe saying stuff that we shouldn't have done. And for a fact that with the likes of Jonathan Palmer and Stuart Higgs, they're on a very tight, no-nonsense ship. And whereas they're very loyal, and we're grateful for that. We knew that we know that if we're not good enough for Britain's, Europe's, possibly one of the world's best domestic series, as the people who are chosen to front that and present it to the paying public, there'd be other people that did it. But and Fred's in his 70s, I'm in my late 50s. We're no spring chickens, but we bring that element of experience and professionalism and integrity, and they know that when you guys have a mechanic, that he's going to put them tyre warmers on the bike, and you don't have to worry about it.
Reliable,
and the tyres are going to be at the right pressure. You just don't have to worry about it. And to some extent, that's us. We can deliver the broadcast without upsetting anybody. One of our key attributes is Fred's non-PC delivery. It's yard scoop. It's not meters, and he's the antithesis of what we're all like have it drummed into us, that this tolerance, and that everybody has to have nowadays. Fred's the opposite side. He says it as it is, and
I've heard a few.
I
like sayings.
Well, what's your take on Brexit then, Fred? Oh, don't get me started, Scoot. I see they've been voting again. Them MPs, how they have the audacity where they go, and then we start getting the tweets or the messages into BSB Radio. I love it, absolutely love it. Fred's on form today and all this sort of thing. And I said, we've got to 12:10 and he's not even mentioned the politics of it all. Any dinghies coming across the channel today, Scoop, and all. We sort of I wind him up a little bit, but that's part of the
What about awkward laughs? I've got a terrible awkward laugh, and I'm always laughing at it really inappropriate times. And obviously, when you're on, it's not so bad on this, especially because I edit it. If there's been a couple of times.
So he makes himself sound absolutely awesome.
I wonder what the tickling stick was doing there, actually. No, I know what you mean. He's like the Test Match special. When one of Brian Johnston's, I think it was, the classic sporting quote, I don't know if anybody who's listening might have been into 1970s Test cricket, but there was English English batsman called Peter Willey, and a West Indian fast bowler called Michael Holding, and Brian came out with it, the bowler's holding the batsman's willy, and he came out with this classic innuendo, and there then followed a period of about 5 minutes of absolute hysterics on live BBC Test Match special.
Mint. But people remember that though, don't they?
Yeah.
Have you ever had it in pit lane where you've asked somebody in?
Not really. I mean, there has been times when
I'm going to come to a wild card just to wind him up.
Things have happened, but you're conscious of the fact that it's on radio, and you can get away with so much on radio because you're not in view of the TV cameras. Michael, Rutter's classic act was to tip a bottle of champagne over me when we were on the podium, and we ruined so many radio mics and headsets and everything else with all that we had to ask him to stop. And for no other reason than driving back from Thruxton and back to the northeast in champagne-soaked clothes because he didn't have a change, or freezing cold. It wasn't ideal. But no, we sometimes I prod and poke a rider verbally to sort of like try and provoke a reaction, and so that you don't see it on radio, but I'm sort of like trying to get him to laugh or say something when I'm winking at him, or sort of like pulling a face at him or something like that. And you might just hear somebody just like have a quick chuckle or like stoic scoop or something like that. But no, Fred's had a couple of they used to call them Coleman balls, didn't they, when David Coleman used to sort of like say Murray Walkerisms and things like that he said, and a couple of times. One was Fred. I think we're okay to say this is that it was something to do with wind. Something he's the riders now got behind the fairing to maximise the output of wind that's coming from behind him and stuff like that. And there's been one or two names as well which we maybe shouldn't go into, but Mr. Hunt and people like that he's got, and Hell and High Water, and this passenger Hell and High Water, and all these sort of things. But no, we've never had any sort of laughing major non-broadcastable can't broadcast for laughing types. The funniest one for it wasn't funny for me was when I got run over, and so there was this accident, and I'm broadcasting at the time when James Ellison's heading for me, of course, and I was saying, he is some Yuko Kageyama just about to leave pit lane, and then the next thing is I'm seeing Ellison drive for me, and then the next thing there's this thud, and it all goes quiet. It sounds like Scoop's been run over, and I still had what was left of me cans on. And he looked out of the pit lane. He has been run over, and of course that was like cue raptures of when he knew I was okay, but that for a few weeks was don't get run over, will you, Scoop, and all this sort of like and he was having a proper little chuckle to himself. But no, we've never had luckily we've never, or unluckily we've never quite had that situation just yet.
Not just yet.
Well, we'll wrap today's show up, and just before we go though, I just wanted to mention World Superbike Testing's been on at Jerez, I believe,
okay.
And the Kawasaki have just released the new Ninja.
Yeah.
Did you get to see it, Dom?
What changes have they done by the fairing? Because that is the only thing they've remotely talked about, is this new fairing change. Now, me personally, I'm a fan. I actually really like the look of it. What about you?
Do you know, I've seen loads of people giving them stick, and I think a lot of people were disappointed because they didn't go down the wings route.
I am generally gutted about that. I am generally gutted.
Yeah, I think the wings is the latest phenomenon, isn't it?
It looks cool.
It's almost like the Rossi leg dangle. Does it? How much of a
Chrissy.
Now the obviously the wings are designed for downforce on the front end to keep the front end down, which so you don't have to run as much anti-wheelie and stuff. Now the way the Kawasaki's fairing is on the front end,
they have wings.
It's not wings, but they're kind of like a scoop in the front, which is it will act in the same to give the same sort of result.
You've seen there's two side holes though.
Yes,
right next to it. So obviously, like you say, it's got the downforce scoop in it, but it's actually got two tunnels either side of it. So it hasn't really got any external wings. More like pocket holes rather than wings.
I think it looks quite savage from the front end, and
I think it looks mint.
I like it to be honest.
But then you've got to realise that the reason that Kawasaki race in the World Superbike Championship, race in any championship, is to sell road bikes. And when it's de rigueur to have a bike with wings on it or whatever, it's almost like when when you went from the twin shock to a cantilever rear suspension unit or a single-sided swinging arm or something. Whereas it's all done, it's like developing tyres or engine. It's if it appeals to the end user, and a guy goes into his local Kawasaki dealer and says, I want a bike with wings on it because that's trendy, then Kawasaki would say, well, there you go, sir. There's that sort of cosmetic element that you look at a bike and you think, I like the looks of that. You ain't bothered. Most
I'd buy a bike just for the wings.
Most riders, you're a semi-professional racer, Chrissy. You are Dom as well. And you will know what a front end feels like riding a bike with wings or without wings. But to the average man in the street, he would find no difference. He would be, it's purely a cosmetic or aesthetic look that he's looking for, so that he can go and park his bike outside the cafe and people admire it. Then whether that is because he's getting an extra little bit of downforce, or because he doesn't have to press the anti-spin or anti-wheelie button or whatever, then he's not really bothered about that. That bike looks cool because it's got wings on it, or it's got a different shape fairing. In Kawasaki's case, with the double air scoops.
But they haven't announced any other changes bar that though, have they?
I read a thing that it was revving up faster, I think.
Is that all they've done?
I don't know what they've done. I don't know what they've done internally to do that. I think it's got a little bit more horsepower.
What I'm looking forward to is the actual first spin of the swinging arm, because all superbikes have the upside down. So like the Fireblades this year. Now what I'm referring to is the lateral bottom arm. So that's blatantly horizontal straight at the back wheel, and then they have this metal arch over the top for reinforcement. But what superbikes tend to do is do it the other way around. So it's flat on the top and curved underneath for like stability. But on this bike, it is the World Superbike. It'll be interesting to see if they actually do that as a stock manufacturer change.
The stocker's coming out in a few weeks, I think.
So it'll be good to see if that swinging arm actually changes, because it does look. It does. You look at the swinging arm and go, "That's factory."
Well, you've got to also consider that Ducati brought the new V4R out. There's a new R1. There's a new BMW. There's a new Honda. Suzuki have put a new model out. How Kawasaki
Suzuki bringing out a new one?
Well, modifications to the GSXR. But again, it's like what's new and what isn't new. How many incarnations did we get of the Fireblade? Since 1992.
Yes.
A new Fireblade, but it's still a Fireblade. So. And the R1, that bike was revolutionary after it took over the R7 as it were, and the old R1 into the new crossplane bike. But with the Kawasaki, there's one stat that remains: is if it ain't broke, why does it need fixing? Jonathan Rea, 6 times world champion on Kawasaki. That fact remains. Now they can't. Okay, Johnny might have got lucky a couple of years ago when Bautista was running away with the championship. Then all of a sudden, the Ducati started.
I'd love to know what happened there. Behind closed doors, I'd love to know what happened that season. It
went to crap, didn't it?
But then I know what you're saying. He's been extremely dominant, so you're not going to be totally reinventing the wheel. It's just going to be based upon the successful world championship winning bike, and they're just going to add a few extras.
They're going to, there's the model. The ZX-10 Ninja is an ultimately successful module. He's not had the success recently in BSB, and obviously with no presence in MotoGP as well. They Kawasaki or KHI are putting all their eggs into the World Superbike basket effectively. And with Johnny Rea, who would Johnny do the same on a Ducati, on a Honda? Who knows? You consider that Johnny was a Honda rider virtually all his career, right the way up until he went to Kawasaki, and he ended up usurping Tom Sykes, who was the kiddie, and then he took over. And you look at how many championships Kawasaki won over the past 10 years in World Superbikes, even going back perhaps 20 years to the Muzzy Kawasaki's and Scott Russell. They've been a dominant force in World Superbikes. Now that they will look at that, their engineers will look at that and think, well, we've got the upper hand, we've got probably the best rider in the series, but we need to give him the tools to do the job. We can't be seen to drop behind. And with all the other manufacturers up in their game, then Kawasaki have to do it as a matter of course.
Sure. And just before we round things off, obviously, is managing Paul Bird's Superbike team media. Are we expecting a rider announcement anytime soon?
There will be a rider announcement at some point in time. Strictly off the record, I don't think much is going to change in Paul's team. I think it's fairly well documented that I think Paul went on TV at the end of the season when he was interviewed and said that that deals had been offered to Josh and Christian, and that it was when he finished first and third in the championship. There was not really a need to change things, and Paul can decide whatever he wants, and now he'll ring me up tomorrow and say, "Can we send a press release out? I've signed Chrissy Rouse and Dom Herbertson."
Sorry, that'd be brilliant. No, I'm not laughing at your bit. Me on the other hand.
But I think it's common knowledge that Josh is settled in the team. That will be his third year with the team. Christian did a great job this year, I thought, riding a Ducati for the first time.
Yeah, me too.
And Paul, he's very, very loyal to his riders. When you consider the years that Shaky Byrne wrote for him, the years that Stuart Easton wrote for him, the years that John McGuinness wrote for him, he was one of these guys that, if you get on with the team, you do your job, and there's not too much bullshit that comes with it. He's a pretty loyal guy, and I think if I was Christian Hidden or Josh Brooks, I would be feel pretty hard done by if Birdie didn't offer me a deal to continue, whether it's on similar terms, less terms, better terms, or whatever. But
time will tell.
I think that I don't know, but my gut reaction is, and I have no inside information other than what I've heard on TV and read in the media or whatever, is that I'm pretty sure that that Brooksy and Idner will be on the Vision Track Ducatis next year, and unless things change, and I've got no reason to believe that they will.
Fantastic.
Well,
big thanks.
With Chrissy Rouse in the junior team, by the way. That's
the
oldest juvenile that there is in the BSB paddock.
I'll still back that 100%. But no, I think we should wrap things up from there. But thank you so much. Obviously, we've got to talk all night with the amount of stories you had. But time's ticking. You've got to get back to Strictly.
Well, that's it. I've got to go and see if my wife's put me a glass of wine on hold. Can I just say, guys, I do tune in occasionally to the Chase the Racing podcast, as well as overtaking you on the M1 occasionally, and what you're doing is phenomenal. I've listened to a few of the podcasts, and I think that this sort of stuff is what the race fans really do enjoy, just seeing one or two of the insights. And for two lads whose priorities are with racing, I think that what you're doing here is absolutely fantastic, and long may you continue.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. And
there's your check.
Huge thanks to our patrons, to our sponsor Colchester Kawasaki, and we've got a newsletter thing coming out. So go over to our website chasingtheracing.com to check that out. And
nice.
Aside from that, we'll be back sometime next week with another pod. So thanks again, and catch up soon.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Click, buy, deliver with the two-time Motorcycle News Dealer of the Year, Colchester Kawasaki. Proud sponsors of Chasing the Racing.